Welcome. This is another episode of Buddhist Yoga and Medicine podcast. We're joined by Lama Glenn Mullin, respected author, teacher, translator. Lama Glenn, we're very happy to have you here again.
Hi, Joy. My pleasure to be with you, James. And of course, I've known you for quite a few years and the wonderful work you do. In fact, you've even hosted me in New York.
In Brooklyn, we were fortunate to have teachings on 6 yogas of Naguma and Naropa and some of the healing yogas that you often teach. So Lama Glenn is a noted authority on many subjects in Tibetan religious and contemplative tradition, and quite notably the 6 yogas of Naropa. So Lama Glenn, would you introduce the essence or the main points of what the generation and especially the completion phase are?
Generally, 6 yogas of Naropa and comes to Tibet with great Marpa Lotsawa, who passes them to Milarepa and then Gompopa down through the centuries and spreads to all schools of Tibetan Buddhism. And when we say 6 yogas of Naropa, it really means completion stage Tantra. And completion stage really means Tibetan Kundalini, or Chandali is the Buddhist word for it. Tibetans translate as Tumo. So all 6 yogas are in fact completion stage yogas, or stages or applications of Kundalini or Tumo, Chandali. In general, if we look at the little text on the 6 yogas, which is just a half dozen or a few more verses, maybe 10 verses by Tilopa, which I include in my practice of the 6 yogas, to the completion stage yogas usually means we should have a basis in the generation stage yogas. And to practice generation stage yogas and completion, we should have initiation. And to get initiation, we should either be very ripe from previous lifetimes, Wangpo Rab, as the Tibetan expression goes, or we should have trained in the sutra preliminaries, the basic, you could say Hinayana Mahayana preliminaries, like 3 higher trainings and bodhicitta, emptiness, the 6 paramitas. So those work as the foundation. Then if we look at Naropa's longer commentary, his is maybe to the 6 yogas, and it says literally called the Upadesh, or the Menga, the oral transmission teaching that Naropa wrote for Marpa in verse, and Marpa translated into Tibetan. He expands it to about 20 verses or so, giving a little bit of information on each of the 6. But in general, we could say the Hinayana training of the Lakpe Labasum, the 3 higher trainings, disciplines, teaches us to kind of simplify our life, to get to calm down this sort of hurricane of sensory data that's always flowing through our consciousness and doesn't give us any space for sitting down in a state of clarity. And then samadhi, which is learning how to sit down and shut up without falling asleep or wandering off into senseless daydreams. In other words, how to just sit in lucid clarity, where have, you could say, ultimate quality time with oneself. And then prajna, the third of the 3, which is usually translated as wisdom, but it really just means observing the manner in which the sense of self arises in very particular contexts based on whatever is the situation one is in. If one's at work, one is a worker. If one is at home and a father, one's a father. If one is a husband or a boyfriend, or a wife or a girlfriend. The manner in which the sense of self binds to specific contexts and does so, giving one the senses that this is the real me. So therefore, Buddha used the word anatma, that wisdom training is really the close observation through meditation. You could say through some philosophical training, but mainly through meditation, on noticing how when we look at a peach, the self becomes very peachy, and we often want to consume a peach. If we look at an ad on television of food, we'll find ourselves just jumping up and walking to the refrigerator and so on. The manner in which the self is just like a moon reflected in water. It's not the moon in the sky that we think it is. It's just a moon reflected in water, like a mirage, like a face in a mirror, like a dream object, and so on. So wisdom, the prajna training, really means noticing how our sense of self is really an illusion or a deluded sense of self, and it distorts our whole sense of reality. Therefore, Chandrakirti, the great Indian master, says, when we misunderstand nature of self, we misunderstand nature of other, then the whole world becomes divided into I, mine, not me, not mine. And the endless struggle based on this fundamental mistake is sustained. Mahayana, you could say, takes it a little bigger, a little deeper, in that it puts universal responsibility as the foundation. How we can learn to move from self-concern, narcissism, selfishness, and so forth, to essentially as having the concern for every living being that a mother has for her one and only child. So Democrats could learn to love Donald Trump, and Republicans could learn to love Sleepy Joe. In other words, our dislike for specific people is based on not understanding the nature of self, not understanding how the erroneous sense of self gives rise to darkness of the mind, and therefore creating an endless chain of pointing fingers at false targets. And of course, we can't really be meaningfully loving without deeper wisdom, and therefore the bodhicitta being the aspiration of compassion that appreciates only deep wisdom makes compassion anything significant or anything deeply significant. As Chogyam Trungpa once put it, without that impetus, we end up with idiot compassion, which I thought was a kind of a cute turn of phrase by Trungpa. He had many of them. He came up with many wonderful English expressions. And Chandrakirti talks about the three levels of compassion in his Madhyamakavatara, the first being mere compassion, ninje sam. Feels good to sympathize with others, and it feels good with others when we show them sympathy. And then the transformative or impermanence aspect, how everything is in a state of flux and change. And so what we're feeling compassion for right now, by the time we say it's already past and is something else. In other words, understanding the interdependence of all things, you could say, and the constantly transformative nature of experience. And the third one was migme ninje, without any object. In other words, without any duality, without any sense of self and others, or to put it in another way, with complete experience of emptiness or the infinity nature of being. So Mahayana puts great emphasis on that and on the practice of the 6 paramitas as the way to stagger in the direction of enlightenment rather than just walk in circles. And then we come to Tantra, and the 6 yogas are Tantra, exclusively Tantra, but are practiced on the basis of those 2 fundamental Sutrayana foundations. Now, when we talk about Tantra, often they talk about 4 levels in the new schools. And of course, Marpa was a new school, a Sarma lineage. So they talk about 4 levels of Tantra, Kriya, Charya, Yoga, highest yoga. And often they put these in terms of the bliss or the pleasure which is used in the practice. Kriya is like 2 young people looking at one another and falling in love. Charya is like they get together and chit chat and talk and laugh and hold hands. And yoga is they kiss and smooch a little bit. And then highest yoga tantra is like they go in for the whole kit and caboodle and go into full lovemaking mode. And that's really only talking about them, not from the manner in which we practice, but the manner, you could say, in which the mind feels pleasure in the practice and accesses that pleasure as a way of relaxing the mind and the sense of self. You could say relaxing the anxiety-driven mental processor or the stress mental processor. When we feel pleasure, we immediately feel more relaxed. That more relaxed, you could say, opens us to a deeper way of looking at things. So Tantra is just really talking about that. Highest Yoga Tantra, with all 4 of those Tantras, I should say, we enter by means of initiation. Abhishek in Sanskrit. Abhishek means like a clear washing. In other words, from when Buddha taught Tantra, with each Tantra he taught, he gave initiations to his immediate students. And that initiation is based on a mandala. The mandala is based on a central Buddha figure, you could say. And all 4 levels of Tantra have two levels of practice, the first stage and the second stage. In Kriya Charya, the first stage is just called Rinpa Tongpo, first stage. And in sort of common talk with Tibetans, it's called Dakye, which means self-generating as the deity. So then if we ask, what's the main difference between Sutra and Tantra? We could say in Sutra, we're sort of operating on the sense that I'm not very enlightened. I would like to be more enlightened. And therefore, I will cultivate the causes of enlightenment with Hinayana discipline, meditation, and examination of the nature of self. With Mahayana, the 2 bodhicittas, the 6 paramitas. So it's called Gyugi Lam in Tibetan, the path of the causes of enlightenment, cultivating causes of enlightenment. Whereas Tantra is called Trebugi Lam, the path of the result. Now, this is a kind of a, what do you call, yoga of the mind, you could say. And here, yoga, Tibetans translate as Naljor, which means connecting to the authentic. Nalwa means what is authentic or what's more true, you could say, or natural, something like that. And Jor is completely tying to it. So in a way, we could say all Tantra is a kind of Deva Yoga or Lagi Naljor, or connecting to our innately sacred nature, trying to look beyond our anger and our attachments and our jealousies and our ignorances and so on. And try to find those points of light within ourselves, essentially by means of meditation and yoga. And whether it's Kriya, Charya Yoga, or highest Yoga Tantra, they all follow that same principle. The idea is 4 times a day we sit in our meditation cushion. And if we're doing first stage yoga, we dissolve the ordinary sense of self, go into the infinity of our being, connect to our beyond this and that nature. A little bit like the Zen koan, what was your face before you were born? What did you look like before you were you? As you know yourself today. Every tantric practice begins with this dissolving the ordinary sense of self into the infinity of being. In Kriya and Charya tantras, they call this Dundangi law, the deity of ultimate significance, or your sacred nature of ultimate significance. In the highest Yoga Tantra, we simply call it connecting to your mother clear light quality, your natural mother clear light, Dharmakaya or Dharmadhatu nature. In other words, connecting to something about yourself which is like the clear sky, unobstructed by dark clouds, by dust and pollution and so forth. It's, you could say I am already a Buddha nature. And so it's a little bit of a, you could say, radical juxtapositioning. We could say up until Tantra, we tried to look at the ordinary way the sense of self arises, or the false sense of self arises, the way it binds to objects of experience. And then rather than look at the moon in the sky, we're looking at the moon in water. In other words, we fall under the spell of this false sense of self, and our entire existence is recontextualized within that false sense of self. So in Sutrayana, we could say we're sort of whittling down that a little bit, understanding the process a bit better, allowing this moon and water to be less hypnotic from the actual fullness of what we're experiencing, which is the sky and the totality of the universe. And so in Tantra, the highest Yoga Tantra, we do this simply by imagining we're dying. James is dying, Glenn is dying, and the world dissolves into light, and that dissolves into one's body, and that, just as at the time of death, goes into the essential radiance of the soul at the heart, that goes into the infinite radiance of being. You could say it's totally letting go of our ordinary sense of self and trying to re-identify with our infinitely radiant, joyful nature. This Dharmakaya is said to be very similar to the moment of sexual orgasm. So often it's depicted in Tantra by figures such as Chakrasambhara behind me, who a tantric Buddha in sexual union with consort Vajrayogini. Because when we're in that state of the infinite joyous radiance of beings, we have 3 qualities, Dewa, Selva, Mitokpa. We've got a quality of utter joy or pleasure, Selva, full awakenedness, and thirdly, no mental tension, Namtok Mepa, no duality factor. So it's often said, and we read poems by Rumi or various other mystics, it's often said in the connecting to our ultimate divinity, it's a little bit like making love to a beloved. And in the beginning, there's 2 of us making love. But at the moment of orgasm, 2 disappear, and there's just the bliss, the radiance, and the not 2, yime, the not 2. So every tantric practice starts with some variation of this, trying to connect to your non-duality nature, your bliss radiant beyond thought nature, beyond conceptuality nature. And sort of planting a firm footing in this sense of one's, you could say, just natural enlightenment or already enlightened nature. Therefore, it's called Gyugilam, the path of connecting to the result. If we can look beyond the dark clouds in the sky, beyond the dust storms or the sandstorms, and see the clear sky. And of course, in enlightenment, we can do everything from that place. Until enlightenment, we're sort of doing a yoga of consciously connecting with it. You could say it's the yoga of, in Tibetan, it's called Lagingagyal. I am king. I am king or I am queen. Our royal nature, royal in that we are already a Buddha, you could say, and a Buddha being sort of a total kind of ruling his or her own world. And so that when we get to that, we do with the instruction in the sadhana is always rest the mind in this Lagingagyal, divine pride of your Dharmakaya nature, your clear light Dharmakaya, your already enlightened nature. Then usually in the sadhana, we come out of that in highest yoga tantra as some sort of form. And it should be a very simplistic form, but easy to bring this joy and radiance into that form. And so with us connecting to your Sambhogakaya or your enlightenment as completeness in the world, you could say. And then thirdly, arising as the ordinary deity at the center of the mandala, which is Nirmanakaya, being able to manifest from the lowest hell to the highest heaven, anywhere in samsara or nirvana, in whatever way is most appropriate. And for that reason, usually it's shown as male-female in union, as chakra sambhara, because you bring that bliss, radiance, and beyond conceptuality into every experience. You should be able to step into a drunken bar at night, bringing that bliss, radiance, and non-conceptuality, and sit down and put on the jukebox and listen to a couple of country songs, arm wrestle with a few of the cowboys.
Where are you finding these restaurants with jukeboxes? Only a few left.
For that, you have to go to Las Vegas, okay, where they still honor the old traditions. But so complete generation stage means once a day, noticing how the essence of your mind is really clear light, Dharmakaya. The essence of thoughts and feelings is really blissful Sambhogakaya. And the essence of everything you do interchanging with the world is really Buddha karma, enlightenment activity. It's you letting out however much enlightenment you have into the world. And whatever comes to you, whatever enlightenment energy you are able to perceive or notice or absorb, you draw it into yourself. So often we say generation stages like that, and we should develop a kind of a strong meditative ability in the process so that no matter where we are or what we're doing, we can always maintain these three qualities of bliss, radiance, and beyond conceptuality. Now, as a very great Karmakagyu Lama, Trungpa Rinpoche once put it, now bliss can easily be the source of attachment, and radiance can easily be the source of anger and irritation, and non-conceptuality can easily be the form of ignorance, unknowing, or darkness of the mind. So for that reason, Naropa in one of his texts says that working with bliss and radiance and non-conceptuality, it's like eating honey on a razor blade. And you have to be a little bit careful not to cut your lips or not to cut your tongue. And it's quite easy if you're not well trained. In other words, if you don't have a qualified teacher, you haven't gone through qualified training, it's quite easy for people to get it a little bit out, to miss the mark, you could say. So generally, so in India, when they did the generation stage training, they'd usually do it for a year or two with not much completion stage. And after they developed a strong generation stage, they move on to completion stage. But Tibetans, I think for the last 500-600 years, tend to make each meditation session sort of half mandala practice or dakya, self-generation, so arising in the three kayas, you could say, and doing some mantras and mandala meditation, and the other half of the session dedicating to completion stage yoga. Now, the main issue with completion stage yoga is the discussion about 3 levels of physicality and 3 levels of spirituality, you could say. Every completion stage text that I've come across tends to start with that discussion. On the other one, we always have 3 dimensions of our physicality at play, and it's a little bit like something is on this dimension or frequency and something else is on, say, an FM frequency, and something else is on an even more subtle frequency. And the way they put it is the coarse mind is the coarse body is the body of flesh and blood, driven by flesh, blood, and bone, driven by the senses. And mainly the consciousness arising from it is a coarse consciousness. We see a mountain and we're in a mountain. We see a shopping mall and we're in a shopping mall. We hear music, we're in a musical mode, and so on. The objects of the senses are driving the quality of consciousness. And everything we do on that level is basically done on the coarse level of consciousness. Now, behind that coarse consciousness is our psychoneuroimmunology system, our Tsalung Tigle, our chakras, nadis, pranas, and bindus. In other words, the body chemistry and the way the body chemistry is dispatched throughout our ordinary body and creates very different mental emotional states depending on what chemicals are being issued or are being dispatched. So when we get hungry, this sort of chemistry goes through our body that makes us think food, food, food. Or if we see a beautiful woman or something and we're a young, vivacious person, the whole body goes, wow, like that. And that kind of chemical body with its energies and its ways, the pathways, the way those energies move is happening behind this more coarse facade. So it's sort of like on a coarse level, we're walking, we can feel the solid ground under us, we can feel the wind blowing against us, and we can smell the trees and hear the birds. And we've got this whole kind of festival of the senses happening in our consciousness simultaneously. But somewhere within that, there's also this behind the scenes chemistry happening. And so that behind the scenes chemistry is what's referred to as Salong Tigle, like pathways, energies, drops, or chemicals. And they give a lot of context to what we make of this whole display of the senses, you could say, how we process everything, and the direction in which everything goes. We could say that on one level, the completion stage in Tumo practice, it's a matter of somewhat learning to take our attention off of the noise of sensual activity and listen for the subtle signaling of the inner energies. I remember maybe 50 years ago or 45 years ago in Dharamsala, I was asked to do a booklet for a Tibetan doctor who was coming to travel to America, to do some lectures in Stanford University. And so I interviewed her, and one of the questions I mentioned is that when Tibetans take pulse, they read in 13 ways to read like what's happening with your heart, what's happening with your kidneys, what's happening with your pancreas. And so all the vital vessel organs get read in these 13 ways. I said, and in the West, we mainly just tend to do a count and feel the pressure. And how is that? And she says, well, it's a little bit like if someone is blind and deaf and they go to the busy bus stop. There's all these buses coming and going, but they're blind and deaf, so they don't hear any of the buses coming and going, and they don't see them coming and going. It's a little bit like that between coarse consciousness and subtle consciousness. You could say it's learning to listen to the subtle inner sounds of the inner winds, as they're often called, the inner prana, the inner ears. When energies move in particular ways, they have a kind of a sound to them. So one meaning of mantra, when it comes to a completion stage, is you could say the energy vibration, which is kind of like sound, produced by these movements of subtle inner energies and the drops that support them. So Tumo generally begins, you could say, with trying to centralize our awareness from the tip of our genitalia to the top of the brain, generally. But in a very particular way. It's not as in Vipassana or Satipatthana or Zen or some of these practices which are more based on general observation. Rather, Lama's translator, Tubden Chimpa, uses the word pinpointing, which is not really like that, but it's a kind of a nice term to see what it's referring to. When we put our attention at any of the 5, 6, or 7 main chakras, basically the energies all start moving and churning at that chakra, and we feel some kind of inner transformation. As we do it more deeply, we could say outer sounds and outer smells and outer sights and outer touches and tastes kind of fade, almost like when you're falling asleep, when you go to sleep and you can't, suddenly it's hard for you to hear the TV in the background, and it's hard, you don't notice much about information from the senses, and then you trip off and you're sleeping, and your mind is completely in another world, unrelated to the senses, really. It is a step beyond, you could say. So when we do Tumo or Chandali, Kundalini, we're sort of doing that, but in a very specific way. And very often we work in Buddhist Tantra, we start with 4 main chakras: crown, throat, heart, and navel chakra. And we put the biggest emphasis on the crown and the navel. The navel chakra, we could say, is the source of most of our sexual energy and our fire energies. And the crown chakra are the most of our earth and water energies. that kind of example is set. And so usually we start here and we bring the energy down, awareness down to the throat chakra. And I'll use that word, pinpointing. When we hold the mind there, this sort of draws. So there's an expression in Tantra, wherever you put the mind, the winds move to that place and they carry the drops. In other words, putting your attention at the center of the brain chakra, it's a little bit like having a beautiful angelette with a peacock feather tickle the center of your brain. And in that tickling, it agitates or stimulates all of the brain chemistry. Sometimes we have 9 chakras just in the brain for stimulating particular ways for particular effects. But here in a very general way, just to bring that strong, sort of joyful, lucid, wide awake feeling. And then the throat and the heart and the navel chakra. And usually at the beginning, we just work with those 4 in Buddhist Tantra until we get some sort of stability. Then usually after that, we introduce the 5th, which is the sexual chakra. And during actual meditation, we may even sit in sexual union with our partner as a way of making that energy even stronger. But the idea is to notice at the center of the brain what those energies are doing, what chemicals are being released. With the throat, how the throat chakra, we could say, balances the thyroidic energies, and too much thyroidic energy makes you really jumpy, and too little makes you very, like a guitar, too tight or too string, too tight or too slack. And the heart, which is, you could say, the deepest seat of listening, and the navel chakra, which is the seat of all the vital vessel organs of the solar plexus. So in the beginning, we could say we want to establish yab-yum in each of these 4 or 5 chakras. What does that mean, establish yab-yum? We want to have the male energies and the female energies sort of complementing one another rather than competing with one another, fighting with one another, something like that. When we do that, our whole mechanism moves to a deeper level. The consciousness arising from it, therefore, becomes no longer coarse consciousness, becomes subtle consciousness. And in tantric texts, it says, 1 minute of meditating on subtle consciousness is better than a whole day of meditating on coarse consciousness. In other words, we're getting to a deeper layer of the onion of our soul, or our spirit and consciousness, our body mind complex. And if we can take that even deeper, then we can sedate even the subtle body and build the indestructible drop at the heart, the mishikbe tigle. Then we can move into a death simulation process. We can be dead while we're still alive. We can be dead without dying, just retaining body to a sufficient level that you could say we suspend the cellular time clock. And there, 1 minute becomes like 100 years of meditation. So those kind of statements are made in Tantra. So we could say in general, completion stage Tantra is mainly working with trying to go deeper into the layers of the onion of our body-mind complex and connect with the primordially pure nature of energy and mind at their most basic or primordial or eternal level.
Lama Glenn, there's this common analogy about the completion phase yogas, and one will begin with the Chandali is the beam or the foundation beam of the path, And
Mhm.
sometimes said that clear light or Osel is the heart, and there are other auxiliary yogas that are daytime and nighttime. Can you share with us a little bit more about these other auxiliary practices, such as dream yoga or clear light yoga and illusory body or gulu? Just something about them.
Right. So
And
generally, if we look at the 6 yogas of Naropa or 6 yogas of Niguma as models, now these are specific systems put together by Tilopa and Naropa. You could say drawing elements from different tantric systems and repackaging them for those specific kind of disciples. So in a way, it's not really so reflective of every system. But what's in those 6 yogas can be found in all other highest yoga tantras. We could say that. But generally, the way it's said about the 6 yogas is, and they're all completion stage yoga. So this is presuming you've done the Hinayana, Mahayana, and generation mandala stage to some extent, and your teacher, your Lama, has said you're ready now to go on to the stage. So then, when that's said, it's then was said that Tumo is like the Medo, the foundation stone on which the whole practice is built. Now, anyone can do Tumo in that sense without getting enlightened. It's like anyone can put a foundation of a building and not end up with a building. So you lay the foundation stone, but you don't put up the walls and the roof. So then the actual practice bringing enlightenment is said to be illusory body and clear light yoga. Why is this the actual practice bringing enlightenment? We could say that nothing else is required, really, if we say it's the actual practice bringing enlightenment. So in one way, it's the be all, and those two are the be all and end all of the actual practices for enlightenment in this lifetime, in the 6 yoga system of Naropa, the original 6 yoga system. Later, they changed it a little bit, dropping out one of the POA practices and substituting with Tumo, with dream yoga, so they can still use the word 6 yogas. Otherwise, they'd have to say the 5 yogas of Naropa. Already the 6 yogas had become so popular as a title, it would be like having to retitle Romeo and Juliet as give them some other kind of name to confuse everyone. Romeo and Juliet's younger sister, Edith. But then when we talk about in that way, then we can say illusory body. When we practice Tumo, we're really working with the energy side of the practice. So this is talking about the 2 levels of reality, Dempanyi, Papa Dempanyi, the 2 levels of truth, as they're called in the Sutrayana and the general Buddhist way of talking. In highest Yoga Tantra, they don't say 2 levels of reality as in the same way. Rather, of the 2 levels of reality as discussed in Prajnaparamita Sutra and Avatamsaka, Lankavatara, all these sutras, basically the conventional level of reality is known as a completely deceptive or false level of reality. In other words, everything that appears to the senses and the whole world of form as completely false and completely deceptive because it's always experienced on the basis of conceptual mind, which always has a partial view. And Buddha gave the example, someone walking through the jungle comes across an elephant, 4 blind people, and one touches the leg and says it's a tree, and one touches the belly and says it's a house, and someone touches the trunk and says it's a snake. I'm not sure what the 4th person touched and thought it was, but anyway, the idea is there is no tree there. There is no house there. There is no snake there. So conventional level of reality is completely untrue in that sense. But nonetheless, something is there. They touch something. So in that way, it is a reality. So therefore, it's called the completely false reality or the completely false truth. So in highest Yoga Tantra, rather than use that terminology, it's just referred to julu, illusory physicality. The illusory sense of the mind is experiencing something. Now, the other side of that in Sutrayana is the emptiness factor. The emptiness of true existence, emptiness of self-existence, emptiness of Ranging-o, Trubha, existing on its own side, existing by itself. So as in the example of the elephant and the tree, it doesn't matter how much you look in that leg, you're not going to find a tree. Or in the elephant trunk, you're not going to find a snake. Or in the belly, you're not going to find a house. So emptiness is referring to when you take away the way things appear and you notice that nothing exists in the manner of its appearance, you come to the emptiness. So the appearing nature, you come to the infinity nature, you could say the ultimate reality nature. So they call it Dundam Dempa. In Tibetan, they use that word, which means the reality of deepest significance. Now, so Sutra uses that, the Prajnaparamita Sutras use that. And now in Tantra, rather than that, they use Maggi Usal, they use the clear light mind. So rather than the emptiness of duality and the illusory nature of appearing phenomena, they use clear light mind and illusory physicality. Everything that appears to the mind is kind of an energetic illusion, a projected illusion. Now, I think this comes because in Tantra, there's this idea that there's really just two things in the universe, energy and consciousness. And these two appear as separate, but in fact, they're never separate. Energy, mind rides on energy like a person riding on a horse. Now, we may think the horse is one thing and I'm another. And I suppose with the horse and the horse example, we are to a certain extent, but you're only a man riding on a horse as long as you're on the horse. If you're off and walking, you're no longer that man riding on a horse. So here, when we're awake, the way we experience the world is really just kind of an illusory physicality. In other words, we've got this body, and through the senses, we get signals, and those signals are transformed into some kind of electricity, you could say, and transmitted to our brain, where the brain reconstructs them completely. There's interesting studies that, you know, if you're hungry when you're shopping and you look at the tomatoes, they look much riper and redder than they do if you've got a full stomach. The way the mind reconstructs everything is always quite distorted based on your chemistry at the time. So then, when we look at the mind as ultimate reality and all energetic processes as conventionality or conventional existence or ordinary existence or conventional level of reality or truth, then in Tantra, we say when you do Tumo, anyone can do it. There's nothing particularly Buddhistic about it. They practice some form of it in India in many different schools, including people who, you know, round up kids for human sacrifices to put inside of dams when they're building a water dam and they want it or put in the foundation of a building. So there's nothing particularly enlightened about doing it in and of itself, but it does offer opportunities for deeper enlightenment if used correctly. So that's why it said it's the foundation stone, but it doesn't necessarily contribute to enlightenment unless you use it in the ways of illusory physicality and radiance of the mind. So then as you do the practice, if you can take your practice on your meditation cushion to a deeper level, and you notice how on subtler levels of mind, you've got subtle levelers of energy, more subtle, more subtle, more subtle, more subtle. And in that way, you can notice how your whole life is really just a dance between your sense of you identifying with your consciousness and the outer world is what you identify as what you as the consciousness is experiencing. In other words, it's a kind of magician's trick that we look at a lake and we think the lake is out there. Of course, it's out there to some extent, but it's part of our whole world, and we're connected to that whole level of being. So therefore, we practice, you could say, illusory body and clear light in two ways: during the day on our meditation cushion and between meditation sessions. And then again at night in two ways. When we go to sleep, we observe the nature of radiant mind and the things that appear in the mind, which is dream. So we either practice clear light of sleep yoga or we practice dream yoga. So if we're doing illusory body yoga during the day, we could say working a little bit more with the energy side of the practice. We're working a little bit more with the Mahamudra side, or if you go to old schools like Bunpo and Nyingma, they use the word Dzogchen, referring to the same thing, the essential sense of the self as identifying as innately, instinctually, as the experiencer, the thing that's experiencing the whole university, the whole universe. And so in that way, we're always on our meditation cushion going a little bit more to the energy side or a little bit more to the radiant side. And it's kind of, you could say, a personal spiritual exploration of the deeper nature of mind and the deeper nature of self, the deeper nature of being. Now, when we talk about the central channel, very often it's said, the entrance to the central channel, we put a little letter A above it, the Atung, and it's shaped like a triangle, like the female vagina. And the female vagina, the three sides of the triangle, representing the three doors of liberation, and there's emptiness and signlessness and no aspiration, mampa mepa. In other words, the ability to allow whatever happens to arise without a duality grasping. And then with senyi mepa, the non-signs, allowing whatever arises in the meditation to arise without this breaking of the experience into experiencer and experienced. In other words, keeping a grip on the unity or integrity of the experience. And munpa mepa, without, literally can be translated as hope, or no aspiration or no ambition or something like that. Really just means resting in the here and now without any regrets of the past or hope or anxiety about the future, just resting in a sense of the completeness of the universe in any specific moment. So coming into the central channel, we basically bring all the energies into this little red fire at the base of the central channel. And you could say the female energy of the three sides of the three doors of liberation is what makes the centralization, going from a world in which we're driven by the world of the senses into this world of the subtle energies. We can move from a coarse body to a subtle body, coarse mind to a subtle mind meditative platform. Then when we go to sleep at night, then noticing how the natural process of going to sleep is very much like the natural process of sexual orgasm, or very much like the natural process of a peak tumo or kundalini experience. And using the naturalness of that as kind of a navigating tool to how to get deeper into our energy levels and mind levels by combining our daytime yoga with the natural relaxation of the coarseness of being into the subtle body at night into sleep.
Lama Glenn, I was reading, and I wanted to alert for listeners two books that I've returned to over the years, the Six Yogas, the primary text, and also a text of translations, the practice of the Six Yogas. And in the first chapter on notes by J. Sherab Gyatso, as a closing question, he frames that there are presentations of the six yogas, and that's something that is unique about Tsongkhapa and his followers. I felt that your presentation actually covered all the essential points in the three aspirations, the Sutrayana, Mahayana, even the view of emptiness. Why is there an emphasis on Vajrasattva and Guru Yoga as a foundation or a preliminary? Why are they essential in these presentations?
Well, yeah, with those two books, the one Tsongkhapa Six Yogas, when I did that, I was asked to, I mean, I was doing that practice. I had received those initiations, those teachings numerous times. And so I was asked to do a translation of Tsongkhapa's work and was delighted to do so. But what's special about his work, you could say, is before him, the six yogas came to Tibet with Marpa, and he gave them to his 4 disciples. And they basically, Milarepa was the most successful, so he sort of gathered, and then they went to Gampopa. They sort of went in specific ways, but within a generation or 2 generations, each of the 10 or 12 Kagyu schools sort of went its own way with their own lineage masters and their own whole cash flow. You wouldn't have a Karmapa teaching in a Drikung monastery or vice versa. Each of them had their own complete lineages of transmission. And not because they didn't like each other, but simply because Tibet was a huge country the size of Western Europe with a population of 4, 5, 6 million people. And these lineages just grew and grew and grew and became very, very strong uniquely. And within all those different schools, some different kind of elements had crept in cross-fertilization with other practices those lamas did. So I think Tsongkhapa's work was very important in that, when Naropa gave the prophecy, it should be kept secret for 13 generations, and then could be more openly propagated. So he was the 13th generation. So he traveled to all those different monasteries, the Drukpa being very important, the Drikung very important. Of course, he had Karma Kagyu lamas, several Karma Kagyu lamas. And so he had gone to most of the main six yoga training centers, which were by his time had been completely separate from one another for almost 300 years. Or, so, and so he sort of, you could say, clarified in what he thought was, he said, he calls these texts Yiche Sumdan, a book of 3 inspirations, looking at the original teachings of Buddha in those tantras, which are the sources of the 6 yogas, like Chakasambhara, Hivajra, Guhya Samaj, and so on. Then the commentaries of the Indian Mahasiddhas through whom these lineages come. And then the commentaries by the early Tibetan masters. So he sort of puts that all together, and you could say brings out what he thinks was the sort of essential uh, genius of Tilopa, Naropa, Marpa, Milarepa, and then as it comes down through the centuries. Now, he doesn't, if he's going to criticize anything, he doesn't say that school does it that way and I don't agree with that, or that's a distortion or something. He'll just say some people do it like that. But if we look at Milarepa or we look at Gampopa, it would seem that this was how it originally was done. And so you could say he's the first one to do that, which makes his commentary kind of amazingly syncretic. You could say Tsongkhapa was sort of the first really successful Rime master of the Tibetan world, studying with 40 or 50 different teachers and doing many years of meditation. I mean, 3-year retreat, 5-year retreat, several times. And so not just collecting sort of lineages in a general way, but fully internalizing the practice. And when I was doing that, then I read maybe 10 or 12 other commentaries just to see how they worked, and included Tilopa's original 10-verse thing and Naropa's 25-verse thing, and some of the other early masters like Yawa Wensapa and Chedok Gyatso. And so there's no doubt that Marpa and Milarepa had described doing both Vajrasattva, I shouldn't say both, doing Vajrasattva, Guru Yoga, Mandala offering, these three as foundations for the 6 yoga practice. I think Vajrasattva was very big in Tantra in India, and certainly with all of the early Tibetan masters. It had remained quite big, but if we look at the Chakrasambhara sadhana, then always in the beginning of even medium-length Chakrasambhara sadhanas, after arising as Chakrasambhara and consort and consecrating the site and the materials, one immediately does the Vajrasattva practice, tailoring it a bit, Vajraheruka Samaya, and the same in Yamantaka practice. Most tantric practices tend to do, especially highest yoga tantra, a yabyum form of Vajrasattva at the beginning. You could say, on the one hand, it's a powerful, refreshing practice, a little bit like taking a bath. And you put Vajrasattva yabyum on your head, and from the place of their sexual union, their love juices flow through you and completely wash away first white, all of the negative physical problems, and then red and all of the emotional, sort of conceptual and communicating speech problems, and then blue for all of the mind problems, you could say, and then all three at once for sort of the instincts of those as being different. It's sort of like taking a bath before you do your practice. But instead of a bath with ordinary water, it's with the love liquids of Vajrasattva and consort, and much more refreshing than ordinary water. And in Tibet, and also in Himalaya and India, I think, the Hindus did all that bathing stuff, but Buddha said, don't bother with it too much. From time to time is okay. So just do Vajrasattva instead of bathing. And for Guru Yoga, I think it's because Tumo, connection with the Guru, connection with lineage is very important. Now, the 6 yogas as part of the Mahamudra tradition, often when the 6 yogas are spoken of as 10 yogas of Naropa, then the 6 becomes 7 by separating out the Mahamudra side, and become 8 by separating out the Karma Mudra, or partner practice, sexual yoga, and become 9 by separating out generation stage as a platform of the mandala practice, and become 10 by taking dream yoga out of illusory body at night and making it its own practice. So I wanted to sort of show historically how it, Tilopa had, I had read all of these anyway when I was doing the work on the other one. And my publishers, Shamba, Snowline, just sort of said, well, why don't you like just sort of write out those other ones and we'll put them out as a sort of an accompanying reader. So the first edition was just called Sankapa's Six Yogas, and the second was called Readings. Then later they renamed them both, as publishers are wont to do. They never asked, publishers never asked writers what title they would like. So they renamed the second one Practice of the Six Yogas, mainly because it has Sankapa's Migrim in it, or stages in practice, how you do the six yogas without any discussion of this school does a little like this school, a little bit like that, and what we will do is like this. So he says, in Tibetan, that's like Shenlug, some, or Kachik Nare, sometimes they'll say like that. Some people do like this, or some traditions do like that. Or Rang Lugla, in our way of doing, we will do this way. And he sort of sorts it out like that. But in the Book of Three Inspirations, he goes through the Indian masters, the early tantras of the Buddha, the Indian Mahasiddhas, and then the great early Tibetan masters like Marpa, Milarepa, and so forth, and Pama Trukpa and Trikung Lamas and so forth. So the Gelugpa lineage actually mainly comes from Trikung. And when Tsongkhapa was alive, I think most people thought the Ganden would be a kind of a branch of Trikung. And it might have developed that way, but sort of the king of southern Tibet wasn't very keen. He was Karma Kargyu, and at that time, Karma Kargyus, because during Tsongkhapa's life, and different lamas were invited to China and given hats by the Chinese king. And Tsongkhapa got a black hat sent to him by the king, and also one of the Karmapas, early Karmapas, was given a black hat by the Chinese king. And that sort of made some friction amongst different Kargyu schools in Tibet. And in fact, it led to war between Karma Kargyu attacking Trikung and Drukpa in an attempt to sort of consolidate the school under the Karmapa. So actually that black hat became a little bit of a problem historically. And it's what led to the creation of Bhutan as a separate country, because the Tulku of the Drukpa was nervous and ran there and set up shop there and gave it the name Drukgyal after the Drukpa Kargyu. But anyway, those are kind of other background things going on around and not really connected to the lamas involved, I would say. These were all machinations of various kings and patrons.
So Lama Glenn, I want to thank you for such a clear and pithy overview and introduction. For those who have watched, I really suggest reading through the first chapters of this book on the six yogas of Naropa and readings or practice of the six yogas. Lama Glenn, where will you be next teaching?
Well, I've just come back from teaching in Brazil and Argentina, and I'll be here for about a month, I think. Then I have to go in January to Mongolia, then Korea, Philippines, and Bangladesh. I've started trying to go to Bangladesh every year because Atisha, the great Atisha Dipankara, sort of one of the great masters of the Marpa Milarepa period, came from there, and his approach to Dharma, you could say the Milarepa lineage to Gampopa is often called the unity of two streams, coming from Marpa Milarepa and coming from Atisha. And so that became a kind of a fusion for all schools of Tibetan Buddhism from that time on. But Of course, as everyone knows, Bangladesh has 150 million Muslims, but it also has 4 or 5 million Buddhists and other traditions of a few million Christians and whatnot. So trying to sort of publish some of the early Atisha contributions in modern Bangladeshi. And so that's fun to do.
We wish you a wonderful and safe journey there. We saw that, I guess it was in Bangla and Bengali, a language Atisha publication. I think I saw that on
Right.
media.
In fact, James, we might give you the opportunity to sponsor a publication there, and then you can come over for the releasing the published date of it.
I'm so grateful for this opportunity.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lama.
Always a joy and pleasure to talk with you and spend time with you.
Thank you so much, Lama Glenn.
Yeah, yeah.